"Get off my lake or I'm calling the cops." That's what the HOA president screamed at me while I was fishing off my own dock. She actually dialed 911 over me using my own property. When the officers arrived and listened, they told her this was a civil dispute. Great, and now I had to put up with a lunatic HOA president every day. I'd bought this lakeside cabin to retire in peace, not to star in a suburban horror show. I couldn't have been more wrong. I'm Adam Rogers, 42. 2 decades as a corporate lawyer had hollowed me out, and this little cabin was supposed to be my refuge, a coffee, a quiet cast, some woodworking in the afternoons. Instead, a woman barreled down my gravel drive in a white sedan like she'd been shot out of a cannon. She marched up like she owned the place, blonde bob, pressed khakis, heels clicking like a tiny gavel. She reeked of entitlement and furry. "Excuse me," she shrieked, waving her phone like a badge of honor. "You're trespassing on exclusive community property. This is being documented for legal action." She filmed me while I sat with a fishing rod, as if I'd committed some grand crime. I calmly told her I owned the cabin and the dock. 20 years of law taught me to stay measured, but reasonable doesn't work on people who've already decided you're the villain. She lost tight, a full meltdown, announcing to anyone within earshot that she was the HOA president, that I needed authorization to be on the water, and then she reached for the nuclear option. 911. "There's a trespasser refusing to leave our exclusive community amenity," she told the dispatcher. "He's destroying our property values." Because apparently a man quietly fishing is a direct threat to the real estate market. When the officer showed up, he looked as baffled as I felt. Christina, because, of course, that was her name, operated her videos like proof of treason. I handed over my deed, stayed polite, and watched the cop's patience thin. He eventually said what any sane person would: "This looks like a property dispute, a civil matter." He couldn't arrest me for fishing on my own land. He left, probably craving something stronger than patrol car coffee. Christina wasn't finished. She stormed to my door, taped an official-looking notice to it, and drove off with the kind of tire squeal that announces victory in bad movies. The notice demanded I cease all water activities and threatened a $500 fine for unauthorized lake usage. I stared at it, thinking I'd slipped into an alternate reality where HOA presidents issue fines for breathing. My lawyer instincts kicked in. That evening I combed through papers the previous owners had left, and in a dusty box I found a property survey from the 1960s. It was brittle and faded, but it mentioned original lake easements, access points, and boundary markings that extended much further into the water than I'd expected. Water rights, easements, these are serious. If that survey said what I thought it did, Christina had just picked a fight with the wrong person. The next morning my neighbor Mike Johnson showed up looking guilty and jittery. He told me Christina had come by after the police visit, spinning rumors about me suing the HOA and taking everyone's lake access. Then he dropped the real bomb. Christina had been selling premium lake access certificates to residents, official-looking documents she claimed were county-mandated. Mike pulled one from his pocket, fancy letterhead, seals, legal $3,000 charged to his card because Christina insisted the county could fine them $10,000 otherwise. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just flexing HOA power, she was running a scam. Mike admitted several neighbors had bought the certificates. The community trust she'd built was weaponized into an extortion racket. She escalated the harassment. Christina drove by my house repeatedly, taking photos, parked at the street's end like she was surveilling me, and the whisper campaign began. Friendly waves evaporated into cold shoulders. The neighborhood shrank around me. I decided to check Mike's certificate at the county office. Sarah Clark, the county clerk, examined it and went from bored bureaucrat to alarmed. The letterhead didn't match county documents, the seal was a cheap reproduction, and the language was wrong. This wasn't a county permit, it looked forged. If Christina had been selling fake government documents, we might be staring at federal fraud. Sarah looked at me with the kind of tired skepticism that comes from seeing too many scams. "First, we document this properly," she said. "Get me copies of every certificate she sold and written statements from those who paid for them." That night Mike showed up at my door pale and shaking. "Adam," he said, voice cracking, "I'm terrified you were right. My wife and I saved for months to pay that $3,000. We put it on a credit card because Christina said the county could fine us or revoke lake access. Watching the color drain from him as I explained the county clerk's conclusion that the certificate was a forgery, I felt like watching trust shatter in slow motion. She organized our holiday parties, Mike whispered. She helped my wife when she was sick. How could she do this? Christina's next move was predictable and theatrical. Notices on every door announcing a mandatory emergency meeting about an environmental crisis and urging immediate action. The language read like something pulled from a government press release, the official sounding, urgent, terrifying to anyone who doesn't dig past the surface. Whatever her angle, it was clear she had been preparing something far bigger than one angry complaint about a fisherman. The community center was packed beyond capacity when I walked in. The fear campaign had worked. Neighbors sat wide-eyed, waiting for direction from the woman they'd trusted. Christina stood at the front behind a folding table turned into a command post, a laptop, projector, neat stacks of paperwork. She looked like she'd stepped out of a campaign photo. Blazer, clipboard, practiced authority. Beside her was a middle-aged man in an ill-fitting suit introduced as County Environmental Inspector Stone. She launched into a polished presentation titled Emergency Environmental Protection Initiative via slides full of charts, photos of dead fish, and logos that screamed legitimacy. Inspector Stone spoke in an exaggerated formal tone about violations of the Federal Waterfowl Protection Act and catastrophic habitat disruption caused by unauthorized fishing. My legal antennae went off immediately as those phrases were buzzwords, not law. The so-called inspector's badge looked costume shop chic, and he read from cue cards with the glazed detachment of an actor performing a role. Then Christina dropped the payoff. An immediate environmental restoration fee of $1,000 per household, plus new emergency environmental compliance certificates priced at $500 each, are presented as federal requirements with threats of prosecution and property seizure for non-compliance. She produced dense-looking reports and assessments at 20 pages of scientific-sounding jargon, charts that didn't add up, and stock photos used to stoke panic. The total she was trying to extract in one meeting was substantial. The manipulation was clinical. Pair fabricated authority with fear, then offer a costly solution. People started to raise their hands in a scared, reflexive vote to approve the initiative. I'd recorded everything on my phone: the fake inspector's patter, the forged reports, Christina's directives. I stood and methodically began to dismantle the performance. My questions about Inspector Stone's credentials cut through the room like a cold breeze. Stone went pale, glancing at Christina for a rescue that didn't come fast enough. Some neighbors began to frown. Doubt crept into their faces. Christina pushed on, desperate to convert fear into cash right then and there, but the seeds of suspicion were planted. Hundreds of dollars changed hands in that room out of terror, people clutching compliance notices, leaving with haunted expressions. But Christina had just committed fraud in front of nearly 30 witnesses, and I had everything preserved: audio, video, and copies of the bogus paperwork. The morning after that theater, I sat on the dock replaying the meeting in my head. Then my phone rang. An unfamiliar local number. "Mr. Rogers, this is Tom Stone. I'm a surveyor. I need to speak with you privately." The name made my stomach drop. Tom Stone, the man who'd played the inspector. His voice over the phone lacked the bluster from the meeting. It sounded small, anxious. We met in a quiet coffee shop, and the man who showed up was nothing like the confident official from Christina's show. He fidgeted, kept checking the door, and when he opened a manila folder his hands trembled. "I have to apologize," he said. "I'm not a county inspector." It was all a lie. He was no actor playing a bureaucrat. Tom Stone was a licensed surveyor who'd been hired months earlier to map property lines in the neighborhood. What he laid on the table next made my pulse race. An official survey he'd done, one that revealed boundary details Christina clearly wanted kept secret. The survey revealed far more than I expected. My property wasn't just the cabin and small yard I thought I owned. It stretched 20 feet into the lake itself. More importantly, it included the original subdivision easement, the very access point that granted the entire community its legal right to the lake. "Mr. Rogers," Tom said quietly, "you don't just own lakeside land, you control the easement that every single homeowner here relies on to reach the water legally. Without it, no one else has lawful lake access." I stared at the document, my legal instincts firing like sirens. An easement that determines the entire neighborhood's access isn't just valuably its explosive leverage. But Tom wasn't finished. He explained that Christina had known about this long before I even bought the cabin. She'd been studying the property for more than a year, waiting for the old owner to pass and the land to go on the market. Her plan was to secure the purchase herself. I had unknowingly beaten her to it, and her hostility toward me suddenly made sense. This wasn't just about fishing roulette, it was about a financial empire that my ownership had completely derailed. Then Tom dropped another document on the table that made my blood run hot. A signed contract between Christina and a company called Lakefront Properties LLC, dated months before I even closed on my cabin. It promised the developers exclusive lake access and zoning approval for a luxury resort worth $50 million. Christina's payout, $5 million in commission for delivering control of the lake. She's been telling investors the HOA controls lake rights, Tom explained, and that she could eliminate any troublesome property owners through enforcement. Her entire strategy was to pressure you into selling cheap, then reclassify your easement as community property. Suddenly everything clicked. Christina wasn't just meddling for power, she was chasing a multi-million-dollar deal. The fake certificates she'd been selling weren't random scams either. Each one created a record suggesting residents had been paying for lake access, evidence she planned to use in a claim of adverse possession against me. I flipped through Tom's stack of documents, stunned by the sheer scale of her deception. The forged permits, the fake environmental emergency, the phony inspectora. It was all a carefully constructed plan to strip me of my rights and cash in with developers. "Why tell me now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady though fury surged inside me. Tom's face was etched with guilt. "Because I was terrified. Christina threatened to ruin me if I spoke up. Said she'd report me to the state board, claim I was colluding with you to defraud the HOA. She could have ended my career." And then came the final revelation. She's desperate because her investor deadline is next month. If she doesn't deliver legal control of the lake by July 15th, she owes them $2 million in upfront payments she's already spent. $2 million. That explained everything. Her unraveling behavior, her escalating threats. She wasn't just grasping at money, she was cornered, facing bankruptcy and federal fraud charges if her scheme collapsed. For the next hour, I combed through Tom's evidence like a prosecutor preparing for trial. He had everything: the original survey, contracts with developers, correspondence with investors, even proof that Christina tried to silence him. Then he handed me recordings, actual audio of her explaining her plan to frame me with fake violations and forged certificates that would legitimize her theft. She even admitted the environmental crisis was fabricated to milk residents while she secured her payoff. While I was still reeling, my phone buzzed. It was Jennifer Walsh, the real estate attorney I'd consulted before. "Adam, I've been researching your property," she said urgently. "There's something about your easement you need to understand. We should meet immediately." When I told her about Tom's findings, she insisted we all meet at her office that afternoon. Jennifer spread the survey maps across her table with the precision of someone who'd spent decades dissecting property disputes. "Adam," she said, "this isn't just lake access. This easement is the cornerstone of the entire subdivision. It predates the neighborhood by 40 years, giving it superior authority over any HOA bylaws or agreements. Legally, you could restrict every other resident from using the lake if you wanted." It was staggering, and it confirmed what Christina had been trying so hard to hide. But Jennifer wasn't finished. She revealed that Christina had pulled a similar scheme 3 years earlier in another county of fake inspections, fraudulent certificates, and HOA intimidation. That case had been quietly settled out of court, but the pattern was unmistakable. Christina wasn't just corrupt, she was a repeat offender. "Adam, with the evidence you've gathered, you can file both civil and criminal complaints. This will dismantle her operation and recover damages for every family she's exploited," Jennifer assured me with quiet confidence. Just then, Tom's phone rang. He answered, went pale, then ended the call with trembling hands. "That was Christina. She knows I've talked to you. She's threatening to get a restraining order to keep me away from meetings and residents." Jennifer leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp. "Tom, you're now under attorney-client privilege as a witness in a fraud case. If she tries to silence you, It only adds more charges to her list. Intimidating witnesses is a federal crime. As we finalized strategy, I realized Christina's plan had backfired spectacularly. In trying to strip me of my rights, she'd exposed herself as a criminal mastermind running a multi-million-dollar fraud. Tomorrow's home meeting wasn't going to be another stage for her lies. It was going to be the unveiling of her downfall. When Tom handed me the official survey before the meeting, I noticed his hand still shook. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as though he knew Christina wasn't finished yet, that there was something even darker hidden behind her desperation. At the community center, tension crackled in the air. This time, nearly every resident showed up, desperate for truth. Christina arrived late with a smug lawyer at her side, clearly expecting a simple dispute she could spin. She had no idea I was armed with more evidence than most prosecutors take into a courtroom. When she tried to launch into her usual performance, I rose to my feet. The room fell silent. Her lawyer's objections were drowned out by residents demanding answers. And when Tom walked in carrying his surveyor's bag, the blood drained from Christina's face. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "meet Tom Stoney, and not a county inspector as Christina claimed, but a licensed surveyor who's been threatened into silence about what he discovered." Gasps rippled across the room as Tom projected the official survey onto the wall. "Mr. Rogers doesn't just own his cabin," Tom explained. "His property includes the original easement that grants this entire community access to the lake." The room erupted. 42 neighbors suddenly realized the truth that their lake rights, their property values, their entire way of life rested on the goodwill of the man their HOA president had been targeting. And then Tom dropped the hammer. Christina had been negotiating with developers to sell those rights for a $50 million resort. Her personal cut, $5 million. The outrage was deafening. Christina sat frozen, her carefully built empire collapsing before her eyes. But I wasn't finished. I stood before the crowd with the calm resolve of someone who'd spent a career dismantling fraud. "Christina sold you fake certificates. She fabricated an environmental crisis. And when I bought the one piece of land that made her scheme impossible, she launched a campaign to drive me out. But I have the contracts, the communications, and even her recorded confessions. And I promise you her fraud ends tonight." And then, I revealed the most devastating fact of all. Christina had spent months telling everyone I was nothing more than a man with a fishing rod and a lakeside cabin. What she never mentioned was the real weight of my easement. I paused, letting the silence draw out as 42 neighbors leaned forward, hanging on what I would say next. "My easement, recorded in the 1960s, doesn't just allow me to reach the water," I explained slowly. "It legally controls whether this community has access to the lake at all. Every house, every dock, every boat launch, every single one relies on my easement rights." Gasps rippled through the room. Faces shifted from shock to fear as the reality sank in. Some residents looked horrified, as though I might become a tyrant holding their property values hostage. Others looked relieved, realizing at last why Christina had been clawing so hard to drive me out. I raised my voice just enough to cut through the anxious murmurs. "Let me make one thing absolutely clear. I didn't buy this cabin to control anyone's future. I bought it to fish, to enjoy retirement, and to live quietly. But Christina's criminal schemes have forced me into protecting not only my property rights but yours as well." All eyes turned to her. Christina looked pale, on the verge of collapse. I didn't soften the blow. "You've been lying to investors, claiming the HOA controls lake access. You've been selling fake certificates, staging bogus environmental crises, and plotting to hand our most valuable asset to developers, all while sitting in this community's highest elected office." Her attorney finally pulled her to her feet, clearly aiming for a quick exit. But the residents weren't ready to let her slip away. Voices erupted, demanding to know how much she had stolen and what would happen to the worthless certificates they'd purchased. Mike Johnson stood, his voice trembling with rage. "Christina, I paid you $3,000 for a certificate you told me was county mandated. Now I find out it was a scam while you schemed to sell my lake access to developers for millions." The room exploded with outrage, neighbor after neighbor adding their voice to the chorus. And that's when Christina snapped. Instead of keeping quiet, She broke into a furious tirade. "You people don't understand. I've been protecting this community for 6 years. I've worked harder than anyone to maintain property values." She pointed at me, her face contorted with fury. "And this man thinks he can come here with his paperwork and destroy everything I've built." Her meltdown only sealed her fate. In her desperation, she admitted to backroom deals, to organizing certificates that were nothing more than forgeries, and to creating environmental protections out of thin air. It was an open confession of federal crimes in front of 42 witnesses. Her lawyer nearly dragged her out the door as she shouted over her shoulder, still insisting the HOA controlled lake rights. Even in disgrace, she clung to authority she never legally had. The meeting stretched on for another hour. Tom laid out his survey findings in plain terms, while I walked everyone through the evidence of fraud we had compiled. Slowly, people began to piece together the true scope of her scheme. By the end of the night, the vote was unanimous. Christina was removed as HOA president, Mike Johnson was appointed interim leader, and the community pledged full cooperation with federal investigators. Neighbors stopped to thank me on their way out, but I could still see unease in some eyes. They knew now that their entire future by the water rested on the goodwill of one Monami. Would I be their protector, or their new threat? The next morning brought an unexpected sight, a moving truck parked outside Christina's house. From my kitchen window, I watched her pack in frantic haste, under the silent judgment of nearly every neighbor within walking distance. Mrs. Peterson across the street sat on her porch with her coffee, enjoying the spectacle like it was live television. Christina barked at the movers about her important HOA documents. I nearly laughed at no doubt more forgeries and evidence of fraud stuffed into cardboard boxes. By mid-morning, Mike called with news that sweetened the day. "Adam, you won't believe this. Her lawyer just met with the county prosecutor, trying to arrange a plea deal before federal charges hit." And then came the black sedan. 2 people in suits stepped out, briefcases in hand. These weren't movers or real estate agents, they were investigators. Christina's desperate exit wasn't just about Shamia, it was about running out of time before the law caught up with her. From my deck, coffee in hand, I savored the peace I'd been craving since the day I moved here. No more bogus fines, no more harassment, no more surveillance by a power-drunk president. Just lake sounds, birdsong, and the quiet unraveling of a con artist. Years of practicing corporate law taught me that the most satisfying victories are the ones where the guilty collapse under the weight of their own lies. And Christina was crumbling in spectacular fashion. When I first bought this cabin, I imagined quiet mornings, respectful neighbors, and leadership that actually cared about the community. That's exactly what I finally got. Mike Johnson turned out to be everything Christina wasn't. As HOA president, he's open, honest, and focused on real community needs instead of feeding his own ego. He holds monthly meetings where residents can speak freely, publishes financial reports for everyone to review, and has created clear, fair systems for handling maintenance and disputes. It's incredible how smoothly things run when the person in charge isn't using the position to fuel a criminal empire. Under proper leadership, the entire neighborhood has thrived. Property values rose by 12%, not just because the lake access issue was resolved, but because word spread about a community that stood up to corruption and took back control. Young families started moving in, drawn to the story of a neighborhood that refused to be manipulated. The lake is busier now in the best possible way. Kids learning to fish, families hosting barbecues, laughter carrying across the water. The biggest shift, though, has been how people treat each other. Christina's fear-based rule had neighbors second-guessing every move, terrified of violations and fines. Now, people lend each other a hand, mow lawns for those out of town, and organize events simply because they want to, not because some rulebook demands it. Removing a toxic leader didn't just fix the surface problems, it transformed the entire spirit of the community. For me, life has finally settled into the rhythm I wanted. Coffee at sunrise, fishing through the morning, woodworking in the afternoon, reading in the evening. No harassment, no bogus fines, no paranoid surveillance by a power-hungry HOA president. Just calm, steady lakeside living. Ironically, Christina's scheme backfired so completely that she ended up creating the very environment I had been searching for. The fallout from her case became its own source of satisfaction. The FBI uncovered that she hadn't been acting alone, as she was part of a larger network that manipulated HOA elections, ran real estate fraud, and laundered money through sham community projects across 3 states. Her sentencing brought closure: 3 years in federal prison and $400,000 in restitution. The judge condemned her for abusing her elected role, calling it a betrayal of the very communities she claimed to serve. Her fraudulent development deals collapsed, forcing her to repay investors millions she didn't have. Civil suits piled up, stripping away everything else. Even her home sold below market value as she scrambled to cover legal fees. The woman who once fined me $500 for fishing off my own dock lost everything trying to chase power and profit. 3 months after sentencing, I received an envelope with no return address, postmarked from a correctional facility. Inside was a handwritten letter. I nearly tossed it, expecting more of her self-righteous nonsense, but curiosity made me read it. To my surprise, it was nothing like the Christina I remembered. She admitted everything. She wrote about how her family lost property in the 1980s, how she convinced herself I had taken what was theirs, and how that resentment drove her into fraud and intimidation. She acknowledged that the easement had been mine all along, and she accepted full responsibility for the pain she caused. Her words weren't excuses, they were reflective, even humble. She confessed that prison had forced her to face the truth. For the first time, she seemed capable of real self-awareness. Reading her apology didn't erase the harassment and stress she inflicted, but it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Mike stopped by later with news that made the letter feel even more meaningful. Prosecutors were using our case as a template for cracking down on HOA fraud nationwide. Families who'd been cheated by Christina's fake certificates were beginning to receive restitution. 6 months later, the state even passed new legislation and nicknamed the Christina Scott Prevention Act, mandating annual audits for all HOAs and criminal penalties for leaders who abuse their positions. 2 years have passed since those chaotic days. Now, as I sit on my dock with coffee in hand, the lake is alive with simple, honest beauty. Ducks paddle past the shoreline, the breeze stirs gentle ripples, and the peace I once longed for is finally real. Christina tried to twist this place into a money-making scheme, but in the end, she only proved that some things like trust and community can't be stolen. And then, one morning at sunrise, something unexpected happened. While fishing, I noticed a car parked at the public access point down the shoreline. The driver sat motionless, and when the door opened, Christina Scott stepped out. She looked nothing like the polished authority figure who once terrorized the neighborhood. No flashy haircut, no power walk, no arrogance in her posture, just a quiet, tired woman in plain clothes, moving with the carefulness of someone who had been humbled by time and consequence. She didn't approach me, didn't wave or try to speak. She simply sat on the public bench and stared out at the water. For nearly an hour, we existed side by side, 2 people bound by a strange, bitter history, sharing the same sunrise in silence. It was surreal. Our last encounter had been her screaming about control while being escorted out of a crowded meeting. Now, all that remained was the sound of the lake and the unspoken truth that both of us had been changed forever. Prison had apparently taught Christina lessons about boundaries and behavior that 6 years of running in HOA never did. After sitting quietly by the lake, she finally stood and started walking back toward her car. Halfway there, she stopped, turned, and looked directly at me. For a moment, I thought she might step onto my property, a move that would have caused immediate legal trouble given her permanent ban from community grounds. But instead, she raised her hand in a small, hesitant wave. Not the dramatic, demanding gestures I remembered from her power-hungry days, but something quiet, or a simple acknowledgement that we had both survived the chaos she once created. I gave a slight nod in return, and that seemed to be enough. She got back into her car, but not before bending down to place something on the bench where she'd been sitting. Then she drove away without another glance. When I finished my coffee and packed away my fishing gear, curiosity got the better of me. I walked over to the bench and found a small envelope with my name, Adam Rogers, written neatly on the front in the same careful handwriting I'd seen in her prison letter. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, Thank you for not destroying me when you had every legal right to do so. The lake is more beautiful when shared with people who understand its value. I hope your retirement is everything you wanted it to be." At the bottom, she added, "The county deed office has the final paperwork you'll need." Tom Stone helped make sure everything was properly documented. Final paperwork. The phrase immediately caught my attention. What could she possibly have arranged, especially from prison, where she had no legal standing to alter community property? The mention of Tom Stone suggested something legit.